Okay, welcome to the British Empire Study Group. We are a bunch of philatelists, postal historians, and collectors, and some non-collectors who enjoy learning about postal history and postal artifacts. We do lean British, but we're not totally British. Our meetings are online, and we're very happy that you joined us this evening. Our next programs that are coming up will be in July on both the 10th and the 27th. We have Alex Heyman, who will be live from London, presenting that 1887 Zulu War exhibit. That should be really fun. And in between those, we have an equally exciting talk with Dr. Darian about the digital future of philately. So we're going to get on with the show. We have a special guest presentator here. In addition to Fernando, we have Ken Pugh, but I'm going to leave Robert, my co-conspirator, to introduce our speaker tonight, Fernando. And I think he may say a little bit about Ken too, but you'll hear more about Ken either during the presentation or at the end. So, Robert, if you could take it away.
Thank you so much, Joan. A few words regarding this evening's presentation. Joan de Sperati, 1884 to 1957, was an Italian stamp forger whose work fooled numerous experts, including Dr. Emilio Diana, an Italian expertiser, and the Royal Philatelic Society of London. Sperati wrote two philatelic works, Philately d'Art, or The Art of Philately, and Livre d'Or, which is similar to a guest book. Both works were translated and published by the British Philatelic Association. Sperati's personal collection of 234 rare stamps were all certified as genuine by experts. His forgeries have become collectible in their own right and the subject of many notable philatelic exhibits, books, and auctions. During his trial in 1948, Sperati convinced the French court that he was an artist, not a counterfeiter, and simply forgot to clearly mark the stamps as forgeries. And he promised to be more diligent about such markings in the future. It should be said that the French jury did not totally believe that argument, though. Now, some background on this evening's presenters. Fernando Martínez is the CEO of David Feldman International Auctioneers, based in Geneva, Switzerland. He joined David Feldman in 2020. He has a bachelor's degree in economics, business administration, and management. And he comes to David Feldman after almost 20 years working for leading international stamp auction companies. His main role is to expand the company's worldwide business, strengthen its position in core international markets, and develop the company's network of business agents. Fernando speaks 5 languages: Spanish, English, Italian, German, and French. If you're unfamiliar with the David Feldman organization, you owe it to yourself to visit their site online. You'll find references there listing famous collections and rarities that can be viewed in their philatelic museum, as well as extensive listings of famous philatelists and experts. They also maintain a wonderful blog with really interesting articles. I highly recommend a visit there to all philatelists. Fernando's philatelic expertise is focused on Latin America and Europe. He shares that he's not specifically a Sperati expert, but rather he has access to the rarest of Sperati material, which he is sharing with us this evening. Any technical questions can be directed to our friend Ken Pugh, a forgery expert in British North American material. Now, a little background on our forgery expert, Ken Pugh. He's a retired educator. Ken taught grade school for 39 years in Manitoba and British Columbia, Canada. He also taught courses in education, anthropology, paleontology, and photography at 4 different universities. Ken received honors from the Prime Minister of Canada and Queen Elizabeth II for his innovative teaching style. He's currently the author of 32 reference works on British North American forgeries. Ken spends his spare time, well, little there is, hunting for and researching fossils. So without any further ado, please welcome Fernando Martínez and Ken Pugh in a presentation exploring the life and works of this fascinating man, Joan de Sperati.
Thank you very much for your very kind presentation. I will talk today about Sperati and as it has been mentioned before, I'm not an expert on the techniques and the world of Sperati. For that, I will have the help of Ken in some instances when he will consider important his involvement. We will go with the presentation right now. Let me share with you my screen. Go here. So we will start with the biography of Giovanni Sperati, four-year or artist. I have even said four-year and artist, because as you will see during this presentation, he was a genius. Gian Sperati was born on 14 October 1884 in Pistoia, Italy, as Giovanni Sperati. He changed his name later as Gian when he moved in 1909 to France, where he stayed for almost 50 years. According to his words, he had a love for chemistry, for the graphic arts, and for imitation, which will explain why he developed a great part of his career in making these reproductions, which he called la philatélie d'art, the art of philately. When he was 15, and before having adult studies of chemistry in Germany, he asked his mom to buy him La Enciclopedia di Química, which was I think it was 10 volumes publication in Italy, which was the best available. And his mom made it possible for him. I think that he just needed, it was like, if I remember well, like 60 lire, and he just needed 2 lire, and the mom was able to provide him the encyclopedia, or the encyclopedia, for him to develop his wishes and interests at that time, at an early age of 15. He got a very important influence of 2 brothers for his interests. One was a stamp dealer, and the other was a photographer and graphic artist who was at the same time the owner of 2 companies, La Fotocelere as a photographer, and L'Argentografica for his works on using the photolithographic technique. This brother, which was the most important of the 2, was called Mariano Egisto. And there are some artifacts from Sperati in which we can see the name Egisto written. I don't know why that happened, but maybe made reference to some knowledge that he learned from his brother Mariano Egisto. He also had a deep knowledge of paper, Sperati, who acquired through his cousin Il Commendatore Floridi, who had a paper mill in Italy at that time. The first stamp that we know he tried to sell, we don't know which was the first reproduction, but the first one he reproduced was for commercial purposes, was the 1883 Gold Coast Quant Penny Watermark Crown CA, which was acquired as a reproduction, because he sold it as a reproduction, by Gian Cividini, the famous stamp dealer in Paris. And Cividini at the time had the good idea of sending the stamp to the expert Thiers in Germany. I think that many of us, or many of you, would be familiar to this name, as you can see it in many classic stamps, Thiers. And Thiers at that time stated the stamp to be genuine. That was in around 1909, when he was in France for the first time. He was there as a commercial, a commercial traveler, selling products of the company from his brother Mariano Egisto. In 1909, and this is coincided with the time he met Gian Cividini, he decided to move to France, and he was working not only reproducing the stamps, that was something which he did during his leisure time, but his main occupations were the commercial traveler, later importer of Italian foods, and an agent for a chemical company, apart from making some investment which didn't work so well. In the early period in France, he was not selling the reproduction himself, but he was using dealers to I believe, to avoid the illogical exposure. But we don't know to which extent he was selling them as original stamps or reproductions. What we know is that Gian Cividini at that time knew, when he bought that first stamp from Jean de Sperati, that it was a reproduction. And that's what Sperati stated then. The paper is very important for Jean de Sperati to obtain the good reproductions, and the paper has to be from that time. And we know that he acquired, during those early years in France, large quantities of all commercial letters from booksellers. And still the family, after he passed away, they still had big piles of these letters, which were incinerated later. In 1931, he moved that was the start of the most important period for Sperati, when he was fully dedicated to the reproductions of stamps. And this is when he moved to Les-les-Bains in France. And in these localities where he was, the charismatic Claire de Lune house, where he spent his last years. And he was famous also his office, his laboratory, etc. And talking about the laboratory, the sister complained at the time that the house always smelled weird because of the chemical works of his father. We know that he was a very hard worker. The sister confirmed that he was working 14 to 16 hours per day, 7 days per week, and very rarely went on vacation. We know that he liked fishing and he had some hobbies. He had a great passion for Goethe, the German writer. And for the music, he had a great passion for Bach, Mozart, Chopin, Wagner. We know that he had a preference for the paintings related to Dutch landscapes of the 17th centuries, or British or English portrait painters from the 18th century. He was also very interested in Socrates, the famous Greek philosopher of the ancient Greek. The daughter, we know that he complained that she had not much attention from the father. We can understand, and he was so involved in his work during 14 or 60 hours per day, which for him was really a passion. We saw also that he developed, I don't know the name in English, but some problems in his back as well. He suffered also of spine cancer in the last years, and probably everything due to the hard work during hours and hours with his back working on a desk. There is a very important point, and that is that 239 reproductions, and I call them reproductions more than forgeries. The reproductions, that would be the term that I will use instead of forgeries for all the production of Sperati. There were 239 stamps which were declared as genuine by experts at that time, which is incredible. And some of these experts were really well known and very professional, like Richter, for example, the Gebrüder Seff, the Seff brothers in Germany, Dr. Emilio Diena in Italy, everyone knows the Diena saga, the Galvez in Spain, also very famous, Schlesinger in Germany, Miro in France, Brun, one of the Brun in France, etc. And also expert committees. We have mentioned before the British Philatelic Association and the Royal Philatelic Society of London, but also the Académie de Philatélie in France issued certificates or declared stamps to be genuine for some of the reproductions of Sperati before being internationally known as forgeries, after especially the case in 1942, which we will see in some minutes after finishing with the biography of Sperati. The most authenticated reproduction of Sperati has been the 19 quartos of 1868 in Spain. That is interesting. And I would say that together with Switzerland, probably Spain has been the country which he has reproduced the most. At least we could see in the archives and the material which has been recently discovered that the largest amount of cliches and matrices and essays were found in Switzerland and Spain. In 1953, there is an agreement with the British Philatelic Association, followed by Robson Law, to acquire the whole archive of Sperati, and with a commitment for Sperati to not continue with his activity. As we have seen now with the discovery of the material last year, not everything was given to the BPA and some material was kept. And as this is also confirmed by some people who were able to visit the house later after his death or after the sale to the BPA. As you know, there is a famous book which is called Sperati 1 with photo plates and a separate book with tests in which the BPA states the material that they possess from Sperati, with also important essays, cliches, and matrices, which were the tools to make the reproductions. The last years were not easy for him as he suffered from spine cancer and he had to spend much time in bed. And unfortunately, he passed away on 27 April 1957. I think that the spine cancer was discovered in 1956, but he suffered of a weak health during his whole life. He was a slightly short man, skinny, quite eccentric, and I think that he was probably too passionately dedicated to this activity of reproducing stamps, because I think that he was not dedicating so much time to the family, although he was always working at home and he took good care of the family. And as a curiosity, I wanted to mention that all archives which had or any artifact or paper, document, etc., used by Sperati, which had not a stamp image, were burned by the family in the garden of the last house, Claire de Lune, we believe in the 60s. So it was everything taken downstairs, piled in the garden, and burned. Who knows the treasuries which were burned then, because probably they were very important notes to make understand some aspects of the technique which are not so clear. So now I want to show the glasses, the charismatic glasses used by Sperati, with a picture of him holding a stamp with tweezers. These were the glasses with which he was most of the time working to magnify the stamps and the cliches he was using for his work. To make understand everyone how incredible was the work of Sperati and how he became so famous, I thought that it would be that it's important to present this document, which I call the Genesis, which made Sperati fame worldwide, and which was seized by the customs in 1942. But I will explain you through the points that I have stated here, the whole story. So at a certain point, Jean Sperati had such a perfection or reached such a degree of perfection in his reproductions that he thought that he had to make that a true business, which he called la philatélie d'art, and decided to make it known to the whole world. How could he make that known to the whole world? So he believed at the time that by sending some of his reproductions to a Portuguese dealer in Lisbon, which we believe was Eladio de Santos, in World War II, when censorship was applied to the correspondence, so ensuring that the correspondence or the envelope he was sending would have been opened by the customs. That was the way he wanted to make this case, or to have like a criminal case which would have been promoted worldwide. So in 1942, he decided to send these stamps that you see at left, which look terrific. I have had them in my hand, and they are, as usual, incredible reproductions. Even the stamp of Belgian Congo that we see at left, we were studying the gum at the office, comparing with other stamps of Belgian Congo, and it was absolutely fantastic. Cracked, perfect. that surprised me, apart from the designs, cancellations, etc., that everyone knows who has Sperati stamps in their hands. So when he sent this document, or when he sent these 18 reproductions to the Portuguese dealer, he warned in advance his family, saying that maybe one day you will see the police knocking the door. But don't worry, I have done this on purpose. So this shipment was retained, as we presume, by the French customs then. And on 7 April 1942, the French customs sued Jean de Sperati for exporting stamps without declaration. And the process was opened in Chambéry, which was the closest locality to where he lived at the time, in Levant. Then at that time, the expert Mario Gilbert was called to declare or to examine the stamp, and he declared all to be genuine at the request of the judge of Chambéry, which is not surprising because, as we have just commented, the reproductions were absolutely fantastic, and everyone knows the capacity of Jean de Sperati to make these fantastic pieces of art. On 30 November 1942, Jean de Sperati is accused of illicit export of capital, and now the case became criminal and passed to the criminal court. Of course, Sperati has a reason to complain because he knows that the stamps were not stamps, could not be an illicit export of capital because these stamps were not genuine, were reproductions. So he started with that argument, not providing any additional proof. And then the court required the opinion of another expert, which was the local expert, Dr. Locard from Lyon, which is not far from Chambéry, and made the same statement of the first expert, Monsieur Gilbert. And again, on 9 April 1943, Sperati is again accused of illicit export capital. So they don't move from the first accused. Then at that time, Sperati decides that it's the time, of course, to provide to the court identical series, not only one, but a series of reproductions of the same exact stamps, with the same cancellations, with the same gum, with the same margins, exactly the same. And the tribunal declared at that point incompetent. Then the Dr. Locard examined the stamps and declares again that all are genuine after careful examination. And now in this case, again, he wants to carefully examine the paper, the gum, the watermarks, the perforation, and everything looked perfect for him. So everyone was shocked at the time. We have to consider that at that time, very few people know or knew that Sperati was making these reproductions, and probably he had already sent some stamps as genuine to some dealers for sale in that period. So on 17 March 1944, the court declared Sperati guilty and imposed a fine of, I cannot see it now, yes, remember, I think it was 60,000 French francs, yeah, exactly, and seized the reproduction. So they took over the reproductions. Jean de Sperati at this point appealed to the appeal court and collects the money to pay the penalty. But it's funny that the way to collect the money was by producing 3 identical reproductions of Oldenburg number 5 in the Ver catalog, which were offered separately to the dealers Roumet, Nittard, and Isaac. And the 3 declared, there is a typo here in the test, sorry, excuse me, genuine by the famous expert, and probably many of you have heard of him, not the previous one, but this one, Miro, who had also an auction house, Monsieur Léon-Pierre Marre, who was then president of the Chambre Syndicale des Négociants en Timbre, which is the Dealers Association of France at the time. So he was a very important and renowned expert in France. And now this situation, so these 3 stamps that he sold to pay that fee, opened a second process in Paris, which will be solved in 1952. So he opened on purpose 2 processes to make it even more or to spread out even more the news of what was happening with these reproductions. On 27 July 1945, the appeal court in Chambéry designates the Spurs Brun. The Brown family probably everyone knows. Please, and the Dr. Locard again to give a statement about these reproductions, and they declare themselves incompetent or incapable to issue a statement. That was on 27 November 1947, almost 2 years later. So they were completely lost, and they could not find any way or any way to demonstrate that those stamps were forgeries. So both processes of Paris and Chambéry were coincident now, both are open. And then at that time, the expert Monsieur Dubout declares in February 1948 the stamps which were sent to Lisbon that they are not genuine. I don't know if he had any argument to say or to declare that. I don't know. Maybe someone knows the documents, but we don't know what he used to prove that they were not genuine, or they just accepted that they were not genuine, which was the easy solution for everyone. And he admitted that these stamps were dangerous as they could trick collectors. Then we are on 15 April 1948, and a penalty of 20,000 French francs is imposed to pay the customs for capital evasion, which was paid by Sperati, and which was a fine much smaller than the initially applied when he was accused in 1942 of illicit capital export. So Sperati took this occasion to promote this case in the press, and a clear involvement of experts internationally make it even more interesting and had more repercussions. So he did it in a way that he wanted other or very renowned experts to be involved in this process to prove how incredible his work was. And then is where he decides to start with La Philatélie d'Art and sell his reproductions worldwide as pieces of art. Here I want to show you the documents. So we have seen this before, is the document at left, which was sized by the customs, and here we see some cachets or markings from the appeal court, for example, in Chambéry, which is the one in purple at base, and we have one of the customs up top in 1948 when this document was released, as well as one at left from the customs. And they declare here in French, remis à, I cannot understand well what they wrote, de Sperati, le 28 août 1948. So with the date on which this was given back to Sperati on 28 August 1948, and it was signed by the responsible of the customs in Chambéry. At right, we have the same on 26 August, was released by the appeal court before. So it was sent from the appeal court to the customs, and the customs gave it to the Sperati. And in the following page, we have the first statement of the expert who was Monsieur Gilbert at the time, who was the first expert who examined the stamps. And there is a report in the following pages, which I have not reproduced here, with the number of the stamps in the catalog, the price at that time, etc., which serve for the court to establish a value of the material which was not legally declared. And the envelope that we see here is the envelope which was used by Dubout at that time to send the document that we have seen in the previous page to the appeal court in Chambéry. And the manuscript notes that you see there in red and black are manuscript notes by Sperati. And he wrote douane, so customs, 18 figurines, so 18 figurine, what is the translation in English? Like a synonym of like kind of vignettes, for example. And he wrote the name Doctor Locard Expertise. So these are the documents. I wanted to bring visually the documents to you to see it closer, or to bring it closer to the facts. Here there is a more detailed explanation of the three documents. And now, the most difficult part of all, the technique of Sperati. I have explained in very few points what is explained in a book of over 100 pages. And it's a magnificent work published by Robson Love and Karl Wolski. Anyone interested who look for this work and go deeper into this. I'm not an expert on this technique, which is complicated. There are also sometimes like contradictions, and the expert himself, he was using also different techniques to get the same results. So it's quite complicated, but I will try to explain a little bit these techniques as I will present later some artifacts which were used by Sperati to make the reproductions. The book I'm talking about is called The Work of Jean de Sperati II, following the first publication of the BPA, which is called Sperati 1. And it was written by Robson Love and Karl Wolski, and it was published in 2001 by the Royal Philatelic Society of London. So anyone interested in the techniques of Sperati should have a look to this book. They can find also interesting information about his life, other archives, etc. So let's go for the technique of Sperati. So what he initially used, he obtained the original stamps, or stamps which had a similar design to the stamp he wanted to reproduce, or proofs or photographs to create the matrix or cliches to reproduce the stamps. And as alternative, when he was not using the lithography, he used or he created engraving plates that we will see later. The results obtained with engraving plates were not as good as the ones obtained with the lithography. So he called that technique also contact photography, and the steps to obtain the final results are the following. So he uses these stamps and made originals transparent to light with chemicals, press, and heat. Using a photographic emulsion on celluloids or film in contact with the printed side, he obtained the negative with light, which was artificial, or in sometimes it was the sunlight. This is not clear because he uses both lights, which was applied behind the stamp. So behind the stamp was applied that light, and the design was fixed on the celluloid using emulsions and chemicals, etc. To avoid the mirror image, he lifted that emulsion from an initial cliché and was transferred from a negative to a different celluloid or to a different negative, which is called the matrix. This matrix, or matrices in plural, could be retouched if originals had imperfection, and we will see some cases later. And from these matrices or matrix as singular, the clichés were obtained, the clichés which will be used later to obtain the stamps on paper. When he's obtained the cliché, he printed these reproductions by applying on the paper the impression using more chemicals, and if that was supported by an additional paper. So he did it with the press. He put the cliché, then the original paper of the stamp, and below that paper, he put an additional piece of paper. He used original paper of the time, as we had mentioned later, and it is said that he produced some paper, but I don't believe that was true, because that would have been too complicated, as he admitted in one of his reports. The original paper, in that original paper, when he was using the paper of original stamps, in that case, he had to chemically remove the original design, creating like a blank stamp to print the new impression of the stamp he intended to reproduce, and use additional chemicals to ensure that the paper was correct through the ultraviolet lamp. Until 1919, he was not able to know that because he had not an ultraviolet lamp, but with the ultraviolet lamp, he had to work additionally on the paper to avoid some flows and folds and colors which were only noticeable through the ultraviolet lamp. And now some general points is that the chemical formulas used by Sperati had not been disclosed ever. He worked with different temperatures to obtain the colors and the results. And with these temperatures should not be below 10 degrees Celsius. Even with all the information available about the very complicated techniques he used, his skills would be extremely difficult to copy. We have to think that since he was a boy, he was working on this with passion. He had an incredible talent. He was a true genius. As we have mentioned before, he had the influence of different people for the different techniques. And the research that he made was, I mean, nowadays is difficult for us to understand it, even with all the information that we have. And I wanted also to add a declaration made by the private detective hired by Robson Loeb at that time when they made this agreement with the British Philatelic Association to acquire his whole archives in 1953. These were the last years of Sperati as he passed away in 1957. So this detective, Arthur R. Minter, declared, after cleaning the film, and this is the process when he printed the stamp, after cleaning the film, softening, and this is the only declaration we have from anyone who was able to see his work. After cleaning the film, softening it in tepid water and smearing the desired coloring material on it, Sperati placed a piece of paper on the film, protected it with a wet of paper and rolled it through the press. So it does not tell that much, but I wanted to present you this, which was the only testimony that we have of someone seeing Sperati working. The method to obtain the cancellations will be presented later. And now we have seen the main points. I would like to show you some artifacts or the artifacts that we have mentioned, cliches, glass cliches, celluloids, etc. We have talked about them, but nothing better than seeing them now through images. First of all, and this is something that it was presented in the auction catalog when I work on the Sperati material, I would like to mention some notes that we were able to decipher in some of his cliches. And we see several times the word alpha. The word alpha was I have to say now that it's very important or it was very important for Sperati, the celluloid or the film that he used at the time, because depending on the quality of this film, he obtained better or worse results. And it was always an experience. So he had to experience with different films from different brands, from different countries. So we see a quite wide range of brands. It was interesting to see, as I had in my hands, a pile of boxes. He still preserved the boxes of the films, and he kept all the cliches and the glass cliches in the same boxes where he had the original films. So we will explain now these different terms that we will see in some of the artifacts. We have here now alpha. That was a type of celluloid from the English brand Ilford, which was probably the most preferred type for Sperati. And unfortunately, it was not available during the World War II, as France, as you know, was half of the country was occupied by the German, and the other half was Vichy. I think, if I'm not wrong, that Elevan, where Sperati was at the time, was part of the Vichy government at the time, run by Marshal Pétain. And of course, there were not a commercial relationship with England at the time, because France had been defeated and was under the control of the Germans. So unfortunately, the Alpha during World War II, you don't see it in any cliche of Sperati, because it was not available and he could not find it. Sometimes he writes the word calor, and me as a Spanish, once I erroneously thought that calor maybe was something to do with calore or calor, which is heat in Spanish and Italian calore. But no, that was the name of a brand of a lamp that he used for the light exposure. And we believe he had a special preference for this kind of light. It's important to mention that for the exposure that he used with the clichés, or to obtain the clichés, it is not clear. Sometimes we believe he used the sunlight, depending on the time of the day, and sometimes he used the artificial light. And even for that, it was very important, the bubble and the type of light he used. Then we see the word isopan, which was a type of cellulose from the brand Agfa that everybody knows, probably. We see very often the word tire, that we see also in proofs of France, bon à tirer, which means ready to be issued. And we believe that this denotes a satisfactory final result from him to start making the reproductions. We see the word very, or very, abbreviation of verichrome, which was a type of celluloid used or produced by Kodak, another famous company. Then we see the word while very often. While refers to the filters. He used filters when he exposed the clichés to the light. He uses filters in different colors and different thickness to obtain, using chemicals to obtain certain colors. So in this case, we have while vio referring to violet, violet, and that was the one he used for his contrast. I think that the violet filter was to obtain, if I'm not wrong, the yellowish brown or yellowish shades. And we found very often three figures. In this case, you see we have written 18 degrees times 5% times 2 minutes, 30 seconds. And this meant the 18 degrees was the environmental temperature of the room where he was working. 5% was the quantity of a chemical that we don't know which was. And 2 minutes, 30 seconds was the time of light exposure to obtain the impression. So he had like a reference archive with all these cliches where he wrote these notes, because by seeing the results, he could see, according to these notes, temperature, percentage of chemicals, and the time exposure, which was the best one in terms of results. And we will see some examples later. And he often also painted or retouched the surround of the design. And this is found mainly in the matrix or master negatives, but mainly also in some cliches, but mainly in the matrices. And that was applied with the purpose of not allowing the light to diffuse laterally in the process of obtaining the reproduction. Now we will go, I think that it may be everything a little bit confusing. It is confusing. It is very complicated. I don't want to go very deep into this, but I just wanted to, as I stated before, to talk about these points, because we will examine now that some of the artifacts that he used for his reproductions. And we start now with this. So the matrix or matrices, that was the essential piece. That was the main proof for him. The one which he used later to produce other clichés, either on glass or directly on film. In this case, we have some notes here. We cannot see it so well, but in French, he wrote Alpha BCK, which is the brand of Ilford, used by Sperati before World War II. We have talked about it. So this, in this case, We will see it was reproduced in January 1930, as he dated most of his cliches. And we see that it was not World War II, and that's why he was using this film from the aisle for English brand of his preference. We also see the word hiver, which means winter in French. And we believe, and this is just my theory, is that the chemical substance that he was used was probably reacting better around 15 degrees in his laboratory. And I think that in some place, and now we cannot see it because it's very small, he wrote 15 degrees temperature for the environment of the room. So he was experimenting. He was always working in summer, sometimes with 24 degrees, in winter with 15 degrees. Sometimes he was even working at night on purpose to have even the room cooler. And that was probably why he wrote hiver in this case. And as this is the matrix, probably the result obtained in hiver in winter was the best one for him. These are just theories, but they make some sense. In this case, we can see some retouches that we mentioned before. Before I have not said anything, but this is a stamp from Bolivia. Now we have a local or a stamp from Tolima, which is one of the Colombian states. And as we can see, in the right, we have the front and the reverse, and in the previous one as well, the front and the reverse of this matrix. We see the retouch in red that he made, and also the surrounded painted area to avoid the light to come out. So as the impression and this retouch were not allowing to have that surface to be completely flat when applied on an additional cliché or glass cliché, he had to paint it the surround, creating some volume to avoid, as we have explained before, the light to diffuse laterally and then ruin the reproduction. Here, I just wanted to present also not only the matrix of the design, but also of the overprints. In this case, Malayan states. And this is also something which was unknown to the British Philatelic Association. It was mentioned in a book before, but no one had seen any proof of this work. And this is the proof of that. As you see, he retouched here with some gouache and the overprints. So they are handly made, as you can see. So this matrix is the final result to print it or to create the cliches to finally, in a later step, print them on paper. Now we have the glass support cliches. So Sperati, after the matrix, he printed or he uses cliches which were sometimes on glass. Why he used glass? Because glass was completely flat. But at a certain point, he decided to change that technique. And even if the film, the celluloids, were not so flat, I don't know what is the technique he used, but probably with the press, or I don't know how, he was able to have the film completely flat, and he decided to exclude the usage of glasses. Nevertheless, I have to say that these glasses were used very late, because we have the date here from 1951, March, which is a very late period for Sperati. And sometimes when, to avoid these glasses to break, we have some examples in which he was able, through gelatin, to fix two glasses. And he made it in a way that the glass would break was always the glass which had not the impression. So we have here these two examples. And here we can see some notes from him at left. In the negative one, he wrote 351, which refers to March 51. Pound 2 at right, which this is the kangaroo value of 2 pounds of Australia. He wrote the name Australie, centre, which means the center of the Australian stamp. And at bottom, we have, I think he talks about the while. I'm not so sure here. It could be the whiles, the filter, some note about the filter. He mentioned again Australie pound 2. And he wrote déjà, which means already, I don't know to what it referred, and 351 again. And we have at right the same one, but not the negative one with the kangaroo in brown. At that right, another example from British Honduras, mirror image of the stamp. I had not mentioned that before, but for the clichés, he preferred three colors: brown, red or vermilion, and black, because those created the best contrast. Here we have again some interesting notes. So he talks about the gelatin. He wrote gel tiède, which means like tempered gelatin, and two couche fine, two fine layers. And at right, I don't know what he wrote. As you see, it's quite a challenge because apart from the calligraphy, it's also written in French. And in this case, it's dated February 35, as you can see in the upper left corner. Now we have here a very interesting example because no one knew before last year that the beaver stamp existed, or there was an attempt by Sperati to reproduce this stamp. So we have here a vermilion color, as you see, can create a very good contrast. And he painted all the surrounded area in black, probably in this case just for the contrast. And it's a very interesting and I think valuable item because it's completely unique, and apart from the beauty of the stamp is the proof that he also tried to reproduce this stamp. Here I made a note that the vermilion color used by Sperati typically increases in density and thus being able to provide a sufficient contrast. I also mentioned here what I said before, the glass clichés easily break and will be replaced by celluloid in a later period. To avoid breaks, a second glass is used to reinforce. Now we leave the glass clichés behind and we analyze the celluloid or cliché, which is exactly the same, but instead of on a glass, directly on the film. And we have one from Hong Kong at left, in which he mentions Pate, as you see, which is the brand of the celluloid. Pate was the one, was someone who played a very important role in the early period of the cinema, for those passionate of cinema. And of course, he was an important producer of films and celluloid. He wrote also Premier dos parts, which I don't know what it means. Below there is a date in 1950, and he wrote Pate again, voile légère, meaning that he used a light, probably a thin filter to create that cliché. And at right, as you can see, remember that we were talking before about the temperature, the time, the exposure to the light. So we have here a note at right, 18 degrees times 2 minutes 30 seconds. So in this case, he does not mention any substance, but it shows that he worked at 18 degrees during 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The result was not so good, as we can see, and probably that was a good reference for him to exclude those conditions on a later attempt. And below we have again more notes about the while and a reference TCI by him for his archives. Two more examples here of the cellular cliché, and as we see, we have the black and the vermilion colors, which were preferred by him to create good contrast. And as you can see, we can quite well appreciate the quality of the impression. So at left we have stamp of Romania, at right the stamp of Sweden, and at left below we have while imperfect, which was like the filter was defective, is what we believe. And then at right we have the complete, in this case is complete, 22 degrees times 50% times 30 seconds. So he was working in this case at 22 degrees in the room Celsius with a 5% of a chemical substance and during 30 seconds of light exposure. And that was in July 42. So we can understand that the 22 degrees in that period of time were surely possible. At right, we have the mention while violet. So he means that he was using a violet filter. And in this case, we see that he obtained a vermilion shade. So what I said before, that with the violet filter, he obtained a yellowish brown. No, he also obtained, as we can see here, a vermilion shade. And we have below at left again, the 17 degrees Celsius, 6% of a chemical substance, and 1 minute, 10 seconds of light exposure. And it was number 319, and the film used was Pate. Very important always to write the brand for him, because that provided also a certain quality of results. After that, he also used the trial exposure on photographic paper. I just wanted to show one example. These, I have to say, are very rare artifacts, and we don't find many. In this case, he wrote tire, which means issued, on 8 December 1940. Here we have some examples on paper before finally printing them on the original paper for the reproduction. These were probably not satisfactory yet. And as you can see, he could print it in different colors, also 2 different impressions we see in the composite proofs or essays that we have at right. And yeah, in this case, Uruguay, which was also a very preferred country also for Sperati, not only because he used the sun, the image of the sun with rays of the Diligencia issue, the first issue of Uruguay, for his Filatelidad brand, but also because there was a collector at the time, Hoffman, the famous Hoffman, who had a very important collection of Uruguay, which has been superseded by Walter Britz nowadays. Is for the first time someone has made or has built up a collection more important than Hoffman. But at that time, Hoffman had the best collection, which was the best ever formed until recent years. And he asked Sperati to reproduce or to make reproductions of these sun issues. And this occurred probably, of course, after 1942, when he became, well known internationally. There are other collectors and other names which have not been published. Why do we know that Hoffman did it? Because we see on some cliches the name Hoffman. And I think that I brought some example, or I should have brought some examples. Let me see, not before, maybe later. As an example of a final reproduction, I just published one, and I think it's very interesting because the funny side of this item is that this was signed by D'Artea, which was a very famous expert of France. So you see the signature below. D'Artea he was a famous expert at the time, and he signed this to be genuine. It's a very important piece because it's 2 reales from Spain at the time, a very valuable item. So as you can see, the result was fantastic. He was probably able to obtain an original paper from Spain for the letter, and maybe he used an original paper of the stamp to reproduce the stamps. And as you see, the cancellations, we will talk about it later, but he was able also to make them look gorgeous by applying more chemicals on it, and he even used a hairbrush to look it or to make them age as well. This is something we will see later. Now, a very important point is the copper plate, which was very rarely used, and we see it very rarely. People should understand that any copper plate in the Sperati archives are extremely rare because the technique was more complicated. That was the technique he used in his early years. And sometimes the result, or most of the time, was not as good as with the other technique he used. And we will see some examples to compare. So we have here from Dominica, the 1 shilling value tablet. And he used the typography as alternative to the photolithography, which in some issues, until the discovery of the archive from which we extracted these items, in some issues it was not known that attempt of technique to have been used by Sperati. Here we have, for example, it was not known before 2022. It was only known by the collector who kept all this material in secret. He attempted to reproduce the Dominican Republic stamps to the technique of the typography. And probably he decided for, in this case, for this stamp of the Dominican Republic, because as you probably recall, the stamp has a primitive printing. And in this case, he could afford, let's put that in commas, afford to use not a very detailed impression. And as you can see here, he made an engraving plate, he produced that. And we can see the result on this pellet paper that he used as the first step to obtain the final result. Now we made here a comparison between the copper plate versus the matrix. So we have at left the copper plate at top, we have the two items, the copper plate and the matrix. And we can see below the difference of the result. You see that the matrix provides a much clearer result rather than using the copper plate. In any case, fantastic what this man was able to do with a copper plate. And as far as we know, this is the only example in private hands of the same stamp with a matrix and a copper plate. So it's very interesting and very significant for anyone interested in the techniques of Sperati. The VPA, by the way, only recorded the proof in their archives and they didn't have any matrix or any copper plate or any cliché. I don't know when they mention one proof, if they refer to a cliché or a paper proof. This I don't know. But these are some of the various items which were discovered last year and were unknown for everyone. This is just a curiosity, and this is how he created the test beds of Bayern, Bavaria. We see at left that he just cut two glass clichés and joined them together and fixed them on an additional glass with gelatin. I don't know what is the method he used to fix that. I just know that he used gelatin. And you see, that is the result, which is quite good, I would say. And this was done in February 42, as we can see at top right. We have some notes below again about the temperature, 24 degrees, which is very high and very rarely work at that high temperature. The 5%, and if I can see this properly well, is 1 minute 30 seconds the exposure to light to obtain that celluloid. He also reproduced overprints, and here I wanted to bring a couple of examples. We see here very clearly the surrounded area in blue to avoid the light to diffuse laterally. These are, by the way, previously unknown examples, and we have also a proof on paper with some notes, in which in the first one he states that is the first cliché. The second one below is the second cliché, which provided a better result. And the third one is plus foncé, darker. So here we can see how he experimented and how he kept that in his archives to know what is the right cliché to use for the final reproduction. The ink, we just know that he obtained from insoluble powders the different colors, and then he applied more chemicals, and it was very complicated. But it's funny enough to know that the way to test the colors were always his fingerprints. And as you see, we have here some interesting examples. The one at left is very significant for me. It's one of my favorite proofs or essays in the whole archive of Sperati, not only because it's one of the most important stamps of France, the 1 franc Berbel, which is a very rare stamp in this shade from the first issue of France. It's also because he reproduced this stamp exactly on the day this stamp, the original stamp, or 100 years after this original stamp was produced. He wrote at top left, 2349, so 2nd of March, 1949. And he wrote, l'heure du premier, the time of the first one. And we see here the two fingerprints have different shades, and the one at left was taken one day before. The one at right, he wrote deuxième jour on the second day, so he obtained different results. I don't know what was the reason for that. Probably if the chemicals were different or the quantity of powder, I don't know. We don't know at all. Maybe some of these notes can give some traces to find out what it was, but that's all what we could find out here. In the middle, we have the blacks. For the blacks, I don't know if no, in this case, I know. It was used for a cancellation, and we can see L'Étoile, the star cancellation of France at top. And as you see, he was not using a black, he was using a grayish sail, which was the one supposed to be for the cancellation, so not completely black. And here we have more notes, the date 643. I'm trying to see if I can find out something. He wrote something about the ACFA, probably because he was using an ACFA cliché for the cancellation. But about the notes, honestly, I have not studied them before, but yeah, it will be too complicated and they will be I could just presume here. And at right, he just wrote Encre Oldenburg, which means inks Oldenburg, which was the blue he was using to reproduce a stamp of Oldenburg. So he made these proofs or essays for the cancellations and the colors of the stamps. The cancellations is incredible, but he even took photographs of auction catalogs to obtain the cancellations, as he did in this case. He isolated them, and I don't know if in this case, if he obtained them with some chemical substance or he just copied them by hand because he used both techniques. And then he created a cliché and he applied the cliché on this paper, as you can see. And we have again more notes. The date is July 43. He was able, as you can see here, you see the combination of the stamps, he was able to retain or to extract, we don't know with which method, the cancellations and apply them on a negative cliché. And from that negative cliché, it was applied on this paper. Sometimes he even took the image away, and it was even easier for him to obtain the image of the cancellation. So there are some examples. So we have the same case to obtain the cancellations with the design of the stamp still there, which in this case has been the color probably to obtain that cancellation or extract that cancellation, or sometimes we see it just completely blank. And he usually use a negative cliché to obtain or a thin cellophane to obtain that cancellations. So what we see here, the essay, as I mentioned before, is obtained after the application of the cliché on the paper. Here we have some examples of designs chemically removed. What he did in some instances is to apply the new design using the cancellation. So he was able to apply the design of the valuable denomination, or he just removed the image to obtain the cancellation, to obtain a mirror image of the cancellation on a cliché. We don't know how he did it, but he was able to do that as well. And here we have more examples. These at left are the celluloid, the initial cellulose clichés that he used in this case for cancellations of Romania, for the first issue, the bull's heads. We have then a negative cliché and a final cliché in different colors of the cancellations. Here, I just wanted to show an example of an excluded board. He didn't reproduce that stamp, probably because he was not able to obtain a satisfactory technique through photolithography. But we see here, and we presume according to the quality and what we see as the background, that he used an engraving plate, which, as far as we know, does not exist, to make an attempt to reproduce this stamp, which was excluded because, as you can see, the result was not very satisfactory. These are some recent significant discoveries. I just wanted to publish two of them because they are very important in the world of philately, the penny black and the post office of Mauritius. So no one knew that he attempted to reproduce these stamps. And as you can see from the impressions of the cliché, he made a very good job. The one of Mauritius is dated in February 51. He passed away in 57, so he was a quite experienced artist at that time. For the British one, we don't have a date, we just have a reference number, 8/1, and then C.8, which are usual reference numbers in his archive. Here, I just added more examples to analyze again the manuscript notes, but we have seen them before. As you can see, the date at top right in both clichés. Then we have at right the notes with the temperature 18 at 70 degrees. In both cases, 5% of chemical substance used to obtain that impression. And in both cases, same light exposure, same time to light exposure of 2 minutes, 30 seconds. And some notes about the chemical use and how he applied it from the reverse. In the second one, he wrote 3 lire Sardinia or Sardine, 3 lire from Sardinia, which was the stamp as we can see from Sardinia. The frame, not the center, because as you know, is embossed. Here is what I commented before. I have again here a stamp of Uruguay. He wrote pas tiré, which means not issued, probably because the result was not satisfactory for him. He wrote at bottom right ACFA, which is the celluloid, and he stated here matrice Hoff. Hoff is the abbreviation of Hoffman, the famous collector of Uruguay that I mentioned before, who publicly ordered Sperati to reproduce stamps. The BPA and his archives, as part of the material they acquired from the Sperati family, or from Sperati directly in 1953, before passing away in 1957, they have a list of collectors who order reproductions, but they have not been disclosed. They thought it would not be correct, and I understand. At right, we have again more notes. This is an interesting note, which I have not seen in other instances, which says fait tiré total, like he's talking about the number of stamps issued, I believe, 24, the day 742. And then he has below the very chrome, which is the 122 is the number in his file. Very chrome is the film or celluloid. And here he made a note of 30 seconds and he wrote bien. I don't know if it's a correction of the time or that maybe he experienced later that the 30 seconds were much better than a longer exposure, and he wanted to highlight it in a different film. And here we have also, just to finish, 3 examples of this issue of New York. And here I made a note below of what is written in any of them, in each of them. The one I've left, no voila, this is a mistake, is voile imp. They noted that the filter was imperfect. Then CL253 patine, indicating the discard of this example, that he didn't believe it was a good result. And at base, he wrote voile super, referring to the type of filter fabric that he used in the exposure to light. And clichés 253 negative plus 4 pâté calor, as the negative regard a stronger impression. And calor, if you remember, is the name of the brand of the lamp he used. We, in an auction catalog, which presented these items before, we erroneously stated that calor could mean heat. No, calor was the brand of the lamp that he used. And in the example in the middle, we have Première plus désirée, meaning that the first one was the most desired of, I don't know, 2, 3, or 4. Negative plus 4 for 50, a stronger negative, and date February 1950. And there is a note vertically, which states voir aussi 353, suggesting that he had to also consult a cliché dated in March 1953. And the final one at right, as you see, I have tried to present a different example with manuscript notes because we can always find out in these cliches interesting notes. We cannot decipher, we don't know to which extent they were important or not, but if he wrote them, they had a meaning for, of course, and for sure for him. And in the example on right, we had plus fort deuxième jour, so stronger on the second day, dev devant plus do, meaning that he applied a less exposure on front and more exposure of light on the reverse. I don't know this to which extent, but this is what we believe it was always known because the exposure was always from behind. But in any case, he wrote that in this stamp. And with this, we have finished. And let me share with you a less interesting image, which is myself, but I have finished.
Oh, that was wonderful. I'm going to start bringing people over. If you'd like priority, please raise your hand. And I think Rob has some questions for you and Ken. Thank you very much. That was just so fascinating.
Bravo.
I hope it was not too heavy, so to say, because it's not an easy subject. It's a complicated subject. As I have said before, maybe I will not be able to help with all questions because I'm not expert and the techniques are complicated, but for whatever I can be of any help, I will answer with pleasure.
Thank you so much, Fernando. That was wonderful. We have a question here from Dan Rabinovich. He wants to know if there's a Sperati exhibit on public display anywhere, at any postal museums, possibly.
I don't know to which extent the BPA will allow people to have access to the archives, but that could be one. Richard Fraiola had a good exhibit, but he didn't have access to the quantity of cliches and matrices that were discovered last year. So as a reference, you could use the catalog of the auction company that I manage, which was published in December last year. That could be a good reference. And through the descriptions and a wide exhibition of items, some collectors could have a better notion about the subject. And as I have said before, the book, the definite work to consult is the book published in 2001 by the Royal Philatelic Society, written by Robson Blob and Karl Wolski.
Okay, Dan asks a second question in there too. He wants to know if there are any known forgeries or imitations of his work.
I said last year we've discovered many, not less than 15 in this collection, which was completely unknown. And let me tell you something about this collection, because it was hidden for almost 50 years. It was bought directly from the family by someone who was a general collector of interesting things, not really a philatelist. And he kept that hidden for decades until he decided to sell at auction in Switzerland through the company that I represent. And that is where we discovered all these things. And recently he provided some more material. I have to say, as a passionate collector, he lives in a quite chaotic home, and he found more items that he was not able to find before, just very few. But the main core of the collection was sold at auction in December last year, and we found out quite so many things which were not known before. And especially as I have mentioned, the engraving plates, I find them so fascinating because they are so rare in the work of Sperati.
And I'm not sure if the question was whether forgeries of Speratis
Yes.
And yes, and the answer is yes. I have come across a number of not very good forgeries, but Sperati on the back, written on the back, hoping to get a higher price.
James LaRoe asks if Sperati ever worked with or corresponded with Francois Fournier. We know that Fournier issued many forgeries before Sperati.
As far as I know, no. He had correspondence with dealers, and he had also some cases quite like fights with a Dutch dealer as well. We were able to read the correspondence, and I had to say he had quite a personality. He was quite firm defending himself, and he was not someone who would have given up, let's say. But as far as I know, he didn't share with anyone his techniques or work except with the BPA when they bought his archives.
Okay. Peter Moore asks if
And
those discoveries have been sold or will be sold at the Sperati auctions from Feldman.
yeah, we are selling. We sold as groups and some single lots in December, and we are selling on the 27th of June many single lots of Sperati, over 200. And mainly these are cliches, some engraving plates, aces on paper, and very few final reproductions, but mainly are these artifacts that we have analyzed today. Let me add, referring to the question before, Sperati published 20 copies of a typewritten work in which he explained his techniques as well. But I have not had access to any of those, and I don't even know where they are. I don't know if the BPA has all of them, or what is the current status of those.
Okay. John Spencer has a question. Did Sperati produce only one of each reproduction, or did he make several copies of each?
Yeah, of course, he made several copies. As we saw in one case, he noted 24. In some cases, we don't even know, but probably hundreds. And
right. Do we have any counts, exact counts of the numbers?
I don't have the accounts. I think probably the BPA have the accounts, or maybe those accounts were burned by the family in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that he had accounted how many he made, because he was very accurate. Let me now, talking about accuracy, let me add something that I didn't mention before, and it's very interesting, I think, that I read this. These are part of his notes, but just to make you understand how accurate he was, there was a note concerning the papers from him who said the following: by discussing the papers from archives, letters, and books of the period, just as for ink, before deciding on the choice of paper, it is necessary to compare it in all details with the original paper. And this is what he said: examine it by daylight. Has it the same grain, the same transparency, the same thickness? Does it give the same feel to the touch? And then with regard to consistency, is it too brittle, too soft, too silent, or too noisy when a corner is clicked using a finger? So you can imagine even the noise when he was touching the paper. Then pass it under the Booth's lamp. Does the paper appear too dark or too light, too violet, too blue, too red, or too yellow? Is it a clear gray or a dull gray? Is its luminosity the same? So just to give you an idea, this is just about the paper, which was supposed to be, in some instances, probably the easiest part. I just wanted to show you how careful he was. He also aged the obliteration, as I mentioned before, with a hairbrush, and sometimes he even rounded the paper. In the perforated stamps, he rounded the paper in the corners to look it old or aged. He used some dust, he used some brass when the stamp had been already printed. So he had additional methods. So the techniques are incredible, and the patient's accuracy and of these genius are really surprising.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you mentioned that the family had a great bonfire afterwards, burning things like paper. Joan Sperati sent me some samples of the paper he used
Certainly.
for, in this particular case, from manuscripts. And here's where he cut a piece to fit a stamp. And so he was sort of, I think, not appreciated going into the local library to borrow a book to read, because quite
Can you
often
imagine
I'm sure there were the front and back pages of the books were missing when they were returned.
Yeah, and there is a note from Karl Wolski. They were assisted when they wrote the book by the family, and they were helped them. But he mentions that he was in a room with many archives, and he was trying to open several drawings. And he, after the first one, the sister closed it and say, prevented him to continue. And he thought, wow, what kind of treasures I'm not examining? And I don't know what was the reason, but maybe there were proofs in which someone could, through which someone could confirm that he was selling the forgeries as originals. I don't know, but they just burn everything. They just burn everything. I don't want to say things which is are presuming about something which would involve a criminal case, but it was just everything burned. I want to focus on this genius who was really an artist, not only a forger.
It's been sometimes said that Sperati wasn't the greatest forger in the world, and anyone who said that really did not know the extent that Sperati made his own forgeries. There were other forgers who sold hundreds and thousands of forgeries, but generally they didn't make them themselves. Sperati was one of the very few who was the maker of his forgeries. And what impressed me as a photographer for many years, I spent in the darkroom, reading Karolski's and Robson Lowe's book about all of the time and tests made for each individual forgery before it was finalized. As a photographer with darkroom experience, I cannot follow just most of the techniques that he was using. It was so complicated, so intricate, so involved that it's just amazing. And no other forgery that I know of, tested his material and spent so much time producing each individual forgery. Certainly the world's greatest forger, without a doubt.
Yeah, but what we can confirm is that the first forgery he sold it as a reproduction to Cividini at the time in Paris. So from an early stage, he was declaring those stamps to be reproductions. But we know as well that some stamps were sold as genuine when they were reproductions.
Yeah.
We have some questions. Yeah, Rob, we have some questions lined up. Do we want to start getting to those?
Let me ask one more question from the list here, and then we'll go to Hanny Haddad. We have a great question here from Doug Maddox. Can we tell the difference between originals and Sperati now with our new technologies?
Yeah, there are very small characteristics, and they are published in a book, in 2 books actually. And yeah, they are characteristics to identify them. And as you know, many of them have been signed by him as well.
Okay.
But good experts are able to identify them. They are very difficult to identify. And remembering now, for example, in Uruguay, and some people from the audience who collect Uruguay will confirm it, there is a diligencia stamp which has here a break in the face of the sun with the eyes. How do you call this in
Eyebrow.
No, we're hung up.
Yeah.
Fernando,
I can
you're
speak.
frozen.
Yeah, I can speak to the British North American forgeries that Sperati did. All of them can be identified by design characteristics. That you know, these things are repetitive. Even a little piece of dust on the negative on is reproduced in the final copy, and it's in the same place every time. Sometimes it's cancellations where are the mark that identifies his work. So there's always something we have that you can identify the Sperati from the original.
All right. Well, let's open it up to the audience now. We can start with Hanny Haddad.
I'd like to ask a question.
Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, taking in consideration, by the way, my name is Byron Mitchell. I'm from Puerto Rico. I'm very hot here. Taking in consideration that Sperati made such great works of art, forgeries, whatever, it's surprising to me that he forged about 6 or 7 Puerto Rico stamps, which really ain't worth a lot of money. Is it supposed for a forger to forge something to make money?
In most cases, Sperati did concentrate on the higher values stamps, but not every time. He was working on a Canada 5-cent beaver close to the time he died. And that stamp doesn't have a whole lot of value to it as well. So there are exceptions, but most of the time it's a higher value stamps that he forged. But there's always exceptions.
He did it for the art.
Yes. And just to say it could be done and he could do it.
All right. Thank you, Hanny. Now we have Philip Warmby who would like to ask a question. Go ahead, Philip.
I
Excuse
think we
me?
lost, did we lose Fernando? There he is, he's back.
Yeah, I have to apologize. We have a problem with internet here now. I'm in the Bahamas now, and it's not working. I'm using the data of my Swiss phone, so I don't think it can be for a long time with you, unfortunately. Billy, could you solve it?
My name is Hani Haddad. Can I ask a question, please?
So in 5 minutes, I should have again the Wi-Fi operating. Yep. Please let me know.
Honey, go right ahead.
Yes, Mr. Martinez, it's a pleasure to meet you. I've dealt with David Feldman before. I bought many fine Egyptian stamps from you guys. I was wondering, I'm having difficulty getting the auction catalog for December 2022 from your website. Is it easy to get, or is it hard to get to keep for my records in my philatelic library?
No, I mean, why do you have difficulties? I can access, I haven't access into them previously, but if Joan can provide you my email address.
Yeah, definitely, Fernando.
And I can help you with that.
Yeah, and we'll make sure, honey, we'll make sure, send me a note, and we'll make sure that you get hooked up, and I'm sure Fernando and his team will take care of you. They're a great company.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure.
Yeah, and I could add, as far as email addresses, if we don't have time to answer your questions on British North America, I'll give you my email there. I think, and it's kpugh@shaw.ca. And you can send me an email anytime afterwards. And while we have time, as a author of the B&A Sperati books, I want to mention that David Feldman has provided so much help to authors such as myself who are doing research in this area that we could not produce the books that we're writing. Here's an example here and another one here of British North American material. And a lot of it is thanks to David Feldman, who allowed me to use the illustrations, not only from the December catalog, but also material online and images that they had that didn't appear in here and either. So just to recognize that David Feldman International is just an exemplary example of the type of business that helps philately overall, helps authors, helps everyone, and they don't ask for anything in return. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your words. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Oh, maybe check out the upcoming catalog. That would be that would be great. Love the Speratis. Okay, Tony, you have a question.
Yes, presumably for the December 2022 catalogue and sale, and also for the current sale, an extensive photographic record of the material was made. And I wondered if that could be turned into a permanent exhibit accessible on the internet. Are there any such proposals, please?
So actually, you can have access to that when you go to past auctions in our website. You can have access not only to the PDF but also to each lot individually. You can even probably download the image as well, and that could be like an exhibit that you go lot by lot examining them, and that is available in our website. I can even tell you which are the steps you follow. We have a top auctions, and then you go to auction results 2012 to now, and by clicking there, you find in December 22, going through all the catalogs, there is an arrow at right which will allow you to see more catalogs. You will see the catalog entitled The Art of Sperati. And by opening that one, you will be able to see every lot of the auction.
Would I be correct in thinking then that every item within the lot was actually photographed and was included in those images associated with the catalogue?
Maybe not everything, but most of it probably is everything, because I see there is a PDF for each lot. So I think that it was everything illustrated. We have two types of files, one with the images published in the catalog, which are in GPG, and then would you have a PDF file with all the contents of the lot. Now, some of these lots have been split into single lots in the auction in June, so you will be able to see more single items now in the auction of the 27th of June of this year. So in a couple of weeks, or less than a couple of weeks.
Yes, fine, thank you. I've received the catalogue.
You are very well. If you need any help, Joan can provide you my email address, and I can individually answer everyone with pleasure. I'm at your disposal.
Great. Okay, we have Alan Smith with a question.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for this detailed presentation. I have to say I enjoyed every minute of it. I have just one question. I believe that Sperati produced reproductions of the early Greek stamps, the large Hermes heads. Is that correct as far as you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you know whether he used typography or photolithographic methods for those reproductions?
I mean, we don't know it now in detail. I'm 99% sure considering the quality he obtained that he used the photolithography method.
Okay. I know that his reproductions are now identified by the Greek specialists. They have ways of identifying them as reproductions. I don't know how they do it, but apparently the photolithographic reproductions are much closer to the originals.
Of course.
Correct? Yeah.
Absolutely. As you saw, for example, in Fernando Pugh, where we presented the engraving plate and the matrix on celluloid, on film, you saw the result was much better. And the engraving plate was very rarely used by Sperati because the results were not so good as we have seen. He could afford that with primitive issues, or with overprint sometimes, but not with highly detailed, as it is the case in Greece, highly detailed designs.
Okay, thank you.
You are very welcome. Thank you.
Okay, now we have a question from Doug Maddox.
So I have a question about the Sperati the man, and was he able to support himself and his family on this activity, or was this simply his ego to see if he could fool the experts?
Considering where he lived and the different houses he had, I think he had a good position. I mean, he was a middle class, a well accommodated middle class. I don't know if this is the right term in English, well accommodated middle class, but he had a nice house. The last one was Claire de Lune with a big garden, an independent house. And he was able to sustain the family. He had just a couple of years which were a little bit difficult when he made bad investments, but he could recover immediately. And I think that the fact of creating this Philatelier de l'Art helped him a lot to sustain the family, and that's why he excluded other businesses, like being an agent for a chemical company or a commercial traveler. And I think he made quite some money with that as well. But he could make more money with the stamps. Indeed, he just pre-production 3 stamps. He was able to pay the penalty applied by the court when he was sued and declared guilty. So I think he had a good position, yeah.
Thank you.
Which is good to know, because considering the hours he dedicated and the talent he had.
At least someone made money on the stamp business.
All right, John Spencer, you've been waiting for a little while.
Empted by the last question. It was, did he have any other form of employment, or was he entirely dependent upon his reproductions?
Excuse me, I could not hear well.
Yeah, speak up a little bit, John.
Did Sperati have any other form of employment, or was he entirely dependent upon his reproductions or the sale of his reproductions?
If I understood well, you mean if he had other activities from which he lived? Yeah. As I mentioned before, he was a commercial traveler. He was an agent for a chemical company, as far as we know, and he was successful with them.
All right. Water, carry everything.
Okay. He could afford a nice house, and yeah, and I think that from the beginning he was able to make interesting money through the reproductions, to the point that this became his main activity.
Okay.
So can we compare him, say, with a company that produces reproductions of classic master
Monet, Rembrandt, and those sort of things, and sells them as reproductions? Or do we classify him as entirely as a forger who was attempting to put his forgeries into the philatelic marketplace?
Again, I didn't understand the question. Maybe someone can.
Yeah, I'm
What
not.
was it? Okay.
The voice is a bit weak. Someone can please repeat the question.
Okay. Do we class Sperati?
Fernando, John, I think what you're asking is a lot of times, I know with paintings, they make lithographs as reproductions.
Yes.
And they sell them as reproductions.
Yes.
Is that what Sperati was really doing? Does that summarize your question, John? So was he really just making reproductions of the great masterpieces and not trying to pass them off as the real thing?
That's my
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. There were both cases because he sold stamps as genuine, which were reproductions, as we saw in a correspondence as well with a Dutch dealer, and there were other cases also in Germany. So he sold some of them as genuine. And it's quite controversial because we have, on the other hand, the early period in which he offered that stamp to Vidin in Paris as a reproduction, which was declared as genuine. But here, probably he realized that the experts declared these stamps or stated these stamps to be genuine, and he thought he was probably fighting with his ethics. I don't know. It's a very difficult question to enter that one. But there are cases of sold reproductions as genuine stamps. And we hope that there are not genuine stamps still around which have not been identified.
All right.
William, you have your yellow hand disappears against your cabinet. So, but welcome.
Thank you. Ken Milton is here with me, and we both thank you for the presentation, and Fernando and Ken for your support. Fabulous. I really enjoyed it. It's very helpful to me. From time to time, I find stamps that have some but not all of the characteristics described in the BPA Robson Lowe document. And I wonder how many characteristics does it take before one has to say, well, this is a Sperati forgery. A lot of times it might list, for example, 6 characteristics, A, B, C, D, and I might find 2. And so is that an artifact of one of the original images that might have had that as well, or should I be calling that a Sperati forgery?
Well, this is a difficult question to answer, but for me, you can call it an Sperati forgery. Yeah.
It is a very difficult question sometimes, because when I'm writing the reference on DNA forgeries, I find exactly that, especially the Newfoundland material. A lot of the identifying characteristics are a little tiny speck of color or whatever, and and it's probably a speck of dust that was on the cleach, or when it arrived. It could have been on the original matrix, and these things sometimes come and go. As a photographer, every now and then we use airbrush and clean the negative, and so a speck of dust disappears, and so it is a problem. And when we have to determine whether it's a Sperati forgery or not, it's done. You have to have a number of identifying features, but not necessarily all of them.
Some of them are obvious to me. where all of the characteristics match pretty clearly. I found one of those Uruguay 100 centavo thin figure Uruguay, a sixpence British East Africa. Now those two I found, and they match right down the line. But there's a number of them that I said, well, I'm really not sure, and I acquired some of the stamps that might have had one or two of the characteristics, but 4 were missing it. So it's I guess it's a decision call. But.
Yeah, in case of doubt, probably what I answered before was not the right answer. In case of doubt, I would not classify them as Sperati. You need all the elements to fully declare with confidence that it's a Sperati forgery. And in case of that, you have always the experts who can issue a certificate confirming the status or not. But I would say you need all the elements. Yeah.
Thank you.
That was the funniest thing to me, is sending a Sperati forgery to be expertized as a real forgery.
There are cases for that. There are cases.
Yeah, genuine forgery.
Exactly.
Thank you. Douglas, you have a question. Thank you for your question, William.
Oh, thank you. It's me that thanks you everyone for the support today. I'm very thankful for you to attend this meeting, and it's me who is the one who is truly thankful.
Douglas, you have a question.
Yes, please. This may be a very, very basic question. Did Sperati, in every case, have an original from which to work? And if so, where did he acquire them? Did he pay for them or borrow them?
An original stamp, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. He was working sometimes with images taken from catalogs, and I don't know how he was able to reproduce them. Sometimes he used proofs when the original stamp was too expensive, and in other cases he used the image of a similar stamp but from a lower denomination to reproduce the valuable denomination of that set.
Oh,
and as we can see, also he created an engraving plate as well. I don't know how he did it, honestly, because but it's just a genius.
Yes, I just wondered that if he had to purchase or borrow, there would be correspondence about that movement of the original to him.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, this is
Thank
all
you.
what I can say about that.
Yeah.
Excuse me,
I agree.
I have to tell you that unfortunately I will have to leave in 5 minutes. I didn't think that it would have last more than 2 hours. I have a dinner with friends, but I will be more than happy if I'm not able to reply to everyone during this conference now. I will be more than happy to reply privately, and Joan has my permission to provide by email to anyone.
Yes, and we will send you all the questions that are in the Q&A. So Aldo, you're the last one with your hand up, so can you do it in 5 minutes or less?
Thank you. Hi, Fernando. Nice to see you again.
Hola, Aldo.
¿Cómo estás? ¿Qué tal?
Muy
Well,
bien, ¿y
we
tú?
need to speak English here. Fernando, just two simple questions. I have seen during your conference that you mentioned that Hoffman was, who is a well-known collector of Uruguay, ordered some reproduction of Uruguayan stamps. Maybe do you have also the name of other old collectors that order stamps from Sperati? And what happened with that material that was in those collections in the old times? Are they still in the market as original ones, or have been registered as forgeries? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. There is a list which is in the hands of the British Philatelic Association of collectors who ordered to produce these stamps. We know that Hoffman did it because in the clichés, as we have seen an example, there is the name of Hoffman. The BPA decided not to disclose that list, and I understand. Probably at that time when they acquired the collection, it was a little bit in 53. It was not so correct in order to respect the privacy, to mention who was ordering these reproductions. Also, because these reproductions at the time maybe were not regarded as they are regarded today, although they were appreciated as very good reproductions. And concerning the material for Hoffman, yeah, from Uruguay, you can find often Sperati reproductions. So there was a large production and you can find them, I mean, often. They are always rare, but you see them from time to time. They are still on the market.
Thank you.
Okay,
So-
should we let Fernando go for dinner?
Yes.
He's a
Thank you
great
very
talk.
Thank you very much.
In New York and not in Switzerland.
Thank you very
So-
much. And yeah, I'm glad that you have enjoyed the conference. As I said, it was not an easy subject, but I would like just to make you appreciate how this four-year an artist was such a genius.
Do you know the next show that David Feldman's going to be at, where people could stop in and
Yeah,
say hi?
we will be in the Stampex in London. I think it's in the second half of September. We will be in Thailand at the end of November, and the Salon d'Automne in Paris as well. We were in BESG recently in the US. Probably we will be in Canada. This is still to be decided. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
And yeah, enjoy the summer.
Thank you, Fernando.
Thank you.
Thank
Gracias.
you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Fernando.
All the best. All the best.
Oh,
to
and
everyone.
Keith says hello, Fernando. So
Excuse me.
Keith says hello, and you'll be getting his bids for your
Oh,
upcoming auction.
thank you. Thank you very much. Say hi from me.
I will.
Have
Have a great dinner.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All the best. Bye
Thank
bye.
Thank you, Fernando.